can't hurt me. If you've clicked on this video, chances are you have already heard about this book. But in case you haven't, Can't Hurt Me is a book which has been written by David Goggins, one of the most popular, well-known social media personalities in the world right now. Someone who you must have probably at least heard of by now. Maybe seen one of his clips on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or Instagram. In case you don't know who David Goggins is, he is one of the most disciplined and hard-working men in the whole world. He's a retired Navy SEAL who used to hold the record for most pull-ups done in 24 hours. And other than that, he's also competed in countless long runs. For example, marathons, ultra marathons, triathlons, and even 100-mile races. So definitely not someone to be taken lightly. Today, I have decided to show you a guide which I have put a lot of time in making. It is a guide which regards the book, and it is, let's say, a kind of reinterpretation based on all of the lessons that can be discovered, which can be taken from his book. So, if you don't know, Can't Hurt Me is mostly an autobiographical book which talks about the life of Goggins, all of the obstacles, all of the challenges he's had to go through, and some of his most traumatizing experiences. So, when making a guide, I obviously had to cut out most of the stuff regarding his personal life and just take out all of the lessons that, as I said, can be taken out from his story. Now, to make it easier for me, at the end of each chapter, there is actually 1 or 2 pages dedicated to a challenge which the author gives us. And the challenge is usually based off of something that Goggins has learned from the chapter. So, to write this guide, I've mostly taken out the information from these challenge pages. And there are a total of 10 challenges. So, out of these 10 challenges, I'll tell you the lesson which has been learned from the chapter and give you an actionable step, which is the same one which Goggins gives you in each chapter. If you have already read Can't Hurt Me, I hope this guide will be of use to you to, let's say, revise everything that you learned from that book, especially if it's been a long time since you have last read it. Instead, if you have never read it, I suggest first of all you go on Amazon and you buy it and you read it. And if maybe, let's say, for economical reasons you can't, I hope this video can be of use to you. Obviously, that not meaning that you should not buy the book. Definitely go and buy it. Chapter 1. Dealing with the cards you were dealt with. So, don't pull out excuses. No matter how bad your life situation is, no matter how poor you are, as unfortunate as that may be, no matter where you live, you shouldn't make excuses that separate you from getting to the top. So, are you getting bullied, beaten, abused? That's awful, but in that case, you shouldn't make it deter you. Those different reasons are holding you back from getting to the top. They are massive obstacles which are doing their best to try and make it so that you won't get to the top. And yet you will make it anyway. And let that be a motivator. Let that be so that when you do get to the top, your story will be even greater. So use the bad cards as a way to fuel you, as a way to push you forward. As an actionable step, you should get out your journal, which I hope by now you have. If you don't, just get a journal. You can use your computer, but I think writing by hand is actually pretty much a lot better. So, journal all of your obstacles and everything that's stopping you from getting to the top. Every bad hand you have, that's what Goggins calls them. And describe them in minute detail. And use them as fuel. Every time you feel like quitting, or every time you're in a difficult situation. Every time you're pushing hard, make it so that you remember that. Challenge number 2. Obviously, I'm looking at Goggins' different challenges, but let's just call them chapters. I think that will make it a bit easier. Chapter 2. Self-accountability. So, the first step of self-improvement, similar to your first step in, let's say, quitting an addiction, maybe stopping drugs, alcohol, getting rid of all that stuff. The first step in all of these is to acknowledge. In the case of self-improvement, it's to acknowledge that you're not where you want to be. So it's to be dissatisfied with your current state. You need to acknowledge every single thing that you need to improve on. Every single objective you have. Every single purpose you feel like having. Obviously, purpose is one thing, but it's a very long discourse. So everything that you want to do in the future, pretty much. And you have to write them all down. Throughout the chapter, David Goggins uses the so-called accountability mirror. He has this mirror in his home, I think in his mother's home, in that point of the book. And what he does, he has some post-it notes. I have one here. Pretty much this thing here. No? He has a lot of them. And he just uses every single post-it note to write down maybe an objective or something to work on, or something that needs to be improved on. He writes them all down and he sticks them to the mirror, and that's why it's called an accountability mirror. And you need the mirror so that you can see everything that also needs to be improved on physically. For example, you see that you're fat, you see that you have a double chin. You need that so that it will help you see where you are in life, and it will help you see what it needs to be improved. So actually, I have started to do that. I actually didn't use a mirror. The reason being the post-it notes I was having were constantly falling off of the mirror. So in the end, I had to kind of put them next to this table, which is right next to the mirror. But obviously, if you can use the mirror, I suggest you use the mirror. So what I want you to do as an actionable step is to use this accountability mirror. Write down all of these obstacles, all of these things I need to be improving on, all of these objectives. And every time you get to an objective, every time you've improved in that something, take the post-it note down and write on a new one. Write out a new objective. Write out something you just realized needs to be improved on, which you didn't realize earlier. And that should do for chapter 2. Now let's get to chapter 3. Self-discipline. Do the hard work, especially when you don't feel like it. I use this quote, which isn't a quote which is found inside the book. It's a quote that is used by an influencer, which a lot of you might already know. His name is Hamza Ahmed. I know that a lot of people who watch my videos are from Adonis gang, so you probably have already heard of him. As a matter of fact, you probably regularly watch his videos. So he uses this quote regarding self-discipline. And self-discipline is in fact a subject which is discussed within chapter 3. So we all have a list of productive activities which we hate doing. You might like working out, but you might hate doing that one precise exercise. Maybe you like doing the bench press stuff, the bicep curls, but maybe when it comes to those maybe ab exercises, maybe flat leg raise, maybe just regular sit-ups, you just really are never looking forward to that. Maybe you love the gym, but you hate doing cardio. Maybe you're a business owner. Maybe you're pretty good at business, but there's that one activity which you just hate doing. Maybe you're good at gym, you're good at business, you're good at cardio, but you just hate making your bed every morning. You need to start doing these activities you hate doing on a regular basis. Use these weaknesses and turn them into strengths. Do you hate doing cardio? Make cardio your strength. Are you great at writing like I am, but when it comes to speaking, you need a lot to improve on? Make it so that now you're better at speaking. Be consistent. Do all of these things on a regular basis. Start making your bed on a regular basis. And once you're already used to doing that, find something else that you could do. Maybe you can prepare a glass of water every night for the next morning. Maybe you can prepare your clothes for next morning when you're going to school or to the gym. Do you maybe hate doing long distances? Run 5 kilometers. Maybe then run 6, maybe then run 7.5, maybe run 10, maybe run a half marathon. As an actionable step, I want you to write down every single activity you hate doing. Pull out your journal, write them all down, and then just do one of them. It's as simple as that. For chapter 4, we have taking souls. So, if you know Goggins, you probably know this sentence, taking souls. But if you don't, let me explain it to you. So, start treating life like a competition. Choose your opponent and take his soul. What does that mean? Let's say maybe you have a teacher, a coach, or a boss. Maybe he's been too harsh lately. He's kind of been disrespecting you. The work he's assigning is unreasonably long or hard. Maybe you feel like he's giving other students, other pupils, other co-workers some preferential treatment. Take his soul. Do all of the work he assigned, no matter how long, no matter how hard. Do more work. Shock him. Earn his respect and turn the tables. Maybe if it's a coach who doesn't give you game time, come to training 30 minutes earlier and stay for an extra 30 minutes after the training session and make sure he notices. You'll see that things will change because you've taken his soul. David Goggins says in his book to take their negativity and to use it to dominate their task with everything that you've got, which I think was a great quote, and I put it in my guide written down. So I actually wanted to speak about this because I actually do have a personal experience related to this subject. So once my history teacher gave out this test. He programmed this oral test for the following Monday. And the problem was that there was already another test programmed, an art test there. So it was going to be a lot to study, and a lot of the students were worried, and no one wanted to go on this oral test. And how it worked was that 4 people had to voluntarily go and take this test. If 4 people didn't go, he would have just chosen 4 people. And if those people weren't prepared, he would have chosen some more people. And he would have pretty much chosen the entire class until everyone had a mark. And so what happened was 3/4 of the class planned to not go that day to avoid getting tested. And originally, I was reflecting on whether or not to do the same. But then I remembered what this book had said, to take their soul. And so you know what I did? I studied the whole week, did what the book said, took both tests on that Monday. and destroyed the history teacher's soul. I've got no real actionable step for this chapter, but yeah, it's pretty much to take your teacher's or your coach's or your boss's soul. Chapter 5, Visualizations. So, we all know how this new generation is now. We all are just scrolling on our phones, having just some random brainless thing come into our head, and we're just distracted 24/7. Thoughts aren't a bad thing. To think is something that renders us unique and renders us superior in comparison to other living species in this planet. The problem is that most of the time we're just thinking of some random bullshit. We're thinking about random Star Wars movie stuff, random TikToks we watched, random Marvel MCU shit, random football games, random, I don't know, can't really think of anything else, random horror movie stuff. I'm kind of basing myself off of past experiences and how I was like 2 or 3 years ago. So instead of thinking about this random bullshit, we should actually start thinking about stuff which is actually useful. And something which is very useful is doing visualizations. Now, visualization is to kind of visualize yourself doing something great, achieving something you want, overcoming an obstacle. And it's easy. You just close your eyes and you just visualize it. And what you should do is to use this thought as a way to propel and to motivate you every time you feel like quitting. Every time you close the textbook because you're too tired and you start scrolling on Instagram. Every time you're about to stop running and walk back home and watch TV while lying on the sofa and drinking Coca-Cola and eating crisps. Something that Goggins tells us about visualizations is to not only visualize yourself in that position of victory, lifting the trophy or hugging your friends in happiness. You should also visualize how you're going to achieve this. Go into minute detail again. Do you want to win an important football game? Visualize how you're going to do it. Imagine receiving the ball in front of goal. What are you going to do then? Visualize what you're going to do. Are you going to run an important race? Look at the track you're going to run and see every possible obstacle and visualize yourself going past the obstacle. So use these visualizations to callous your mind, to crush every single thing your lizard brain is trying to put in your head to make you quit. Make sure you get that. Sorry for the break. Man had to work out. Anyway, we still have 5 chapters to go. And obviously, if you do think I look a bit too sweaty, it's because I have just finished working out. So don't blame me. So, chapter 6 is the cookie jar. So imagine this jar full of cookies. Pretty simple. It has a variety of different cookies, and you put your hand inside the jar and grab a cookie. So let's say that every single cookie in that jar corresponds to an achievement that you have accomplished or an obstacle that you have overtaken. An obstacle that you've managed to overcome. So every time you find yourself in a difficult situation and you feel like giving up, all you have to do is put your hand inside the jar and think of an achievement you've accomplished and use that again to propel you towards the finish line, to defeat your brain. For example, let's say you're running and you're trying to beat your personal best for kilometers. Use the cookie jar. Remember that time you managed to run 20 kilometers and use that cookie to run 21 kilometers. Let's say you're in a difficult situation. You're not at the best mentally. Think of the time you overcame depression. Think of the time you quit smoking. Use that cookie to overcome the obstacle you're facing. And remember, do not use this to fuel your ego. Just use this as a way to motivate you to do more. Never use this to inflate your ego or to make yourself think that you're better than other people. So your actionable step is to write down this cookie jar in your journal, or explain better, just write all of your accomplishments as each cookie. For example, I wrote one in my journal, and I wrote that I ran a half marathon, that I managed to quit a couple of addictions that I had, and that I did 2 Murph exercises, which are very hard workouts that I've only managed to do twice. But I use that, I remember doing that, so that the next time I have to do it, I'll do it. Every time I consider quitting, I'll remember it. Chapter 7. Progressive overloading and the 40% rule. So, life is one big mind game where you play against yourself and your lizard brain. You need to realize that most of the time, when you're doing something hard and you are certain that you can't do more, instead, you're still able to do way more. David Goggins calls this the 40% rule. Every time he's doing something hard and he feels like he can no longer do it, he convinces his own mind into instead believing that he's only doing 40% of what he can actually do. He's only fulfilling 40% of his capabilities. So he uses his 40% rule to work 60% harder. And when he feels like he can no longer work anymore, he feels like giving up, he uses the 40% rule again to do that extra bit harder, and he uses it again and again until he's completed his task. So, the actionable step is to use the 40% rule to work that tiny bit more every single time. So how does this work? Let's say you do 10 push-ups. Next time you do 11. Next time you do 12. And maybe, I don't know, you get to 15 and you feel like you can no longer do them anymore. Just use the 40% rule to do that extra one more. Or maybe you won't even be able to do another one, but you just do half a one. You try and do it and they just collapse to the ground. And that's completely fine, because at least it's that slight bit better than last time. So that is your actionable step. Every time you think you've reached your zenith, push that 60% harder. Use the 40% rule. Chapter 8. Schedules and timetables. So, the same way that when you're fat, you're morbidly obese, you have to trim the fat off. Here, we're going to try and trim the fat off of our day. So, how that works is, we have to try and acknowledge and point out every piece of fat, and by fat, I mean every single bit of wasted time we have in our day, and trim it out of our day to allow more productive activities to make their way into our schedule, or to expand the time we already have in our schedule of that precise activity. So I believe, and I don't think I'm the only person here who believes so, that without even realizing it, we waste, I'd say, at least 40% of our time of the day without even realizing it. Whether it's just scrolling on TikTok, originally thinking, I don't know, it's just going to be 5 minutes, and then it ends up being 10 minutes, and maybe it ends up being 1 hour. Or, I don't know, you say you're going to take a break off of work, and so you just check your notifications, you end up watching a 30-minute video. And maybe it's self-improvement, so you think it's productive. Now, as I said, we need to start acknowledging the bad habits that take too much time off of our day and try to either moderate them or cut them out completely. So what we can do is we can either leave more space to the activities we already have in our day. Maybe you read 10 pages, you could read 20 pages instead of reading 10 every day. You can meditate for 20 minutes instead of 10 minutes. You can write 5 more sentences in your journal about what you're grateful for. Or we can just directly find more productive alternatives to these habits. For example, if you don't read at all, you can start reading instead of watching Netflix or anime. Or maybe instead of watching Netflix and anime, you can start watching the news, which sure is still TV time, but at least it's more productive than watching anime or Netflix. So, this actionable step is quite long. Consider the following 3 weeks. Now, in your first week, what you have to do is just live your life normally, but start taking notes. And you need to take notes on all of the bad habits that take too much time off of your day. You need to start acknowledging them, write them down, and then trim them out or moderate them. In your second week, instead, try and live this new schedule you've just created for yourself with all of the fat which has been trimmed out, and try to acknowledge any excess dead space which might still be left. Maybe it just might be 5 minutes between two activities. Maybe you spend those 5 minutes scrolling on Instagram. Trim that 5 minutes off. Replace it with something more productive. Those 5 productive minutes might just be staring into the wall and breathing. Or maybe reading a sentence from the Bible, or from the Quran, or from any religious book which you decide to follow. Or maybe read a philosophical quote from a famous philosopher. Whatever you wish, as long as it's somehow productive. And by your third week, you have a pretty much perfect schedule. Chapter 9. Dissatisfaction. Be the uncommon amongst the uncommon. Did I just say uncommon? Uncommon. I don't know what's wrong with me today. So even when you think that you've made it in life, realize that your journey has just started. Realize that there's still a lot that can be improved on. So, in a certain way, you have to realize that your struggle has just begun. So, let's say you've run your first 10 kilometers. That's fantastic. Now, run a half marathon. You've run a half marathon. Run a full marathon. Then run 50 kilometers. Then run a 100-mile race. Do like what Goggins did. Then, I don't know, run the longest race in the whole world. You managed to get into Harvard. You must be a genius. Now be top of your class. Find a way to stand out even when everyone around you is at the top of their game. Be the best player in the best team. Be the wolf who stands out in the pack. One final chapter, chapter 10. Learn from your mistakes. There's little to say here, but there's actually a pretty long, actionable step here, which is a pretty interesting thing that you can do the next time that you're journaling. So, you have probably already heard the quote, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And it ought to be said that there's a lot of truth in that quote. Every time you fail, make it so that you can acknowledge everything that went wrong and everything that needs to be improved on. Don't fear failure. It's better to fail than to be a coward. For example, I remember when I was, let's say 2 years ago, I was like 14, 15, and I would hate going to the discotheque. I'd hate going out with my mates, and the reason was because I was kind of not really good at pulling girls, no? And not to say that now I'm brilliant, but obviously it was a time where I was in a much worse situation than I am now. So what happened was I just make up excuses to not go just because I was afraid of fearing. But now I've realized that you can say what you want about going out in the club, it's degenerate, and I pretty much agree. But if I do go once every now and then, and by once every now and then I mean like once every 3 months or so, I'll prefer going, and even if I fail, even if there's a girl that I like and she rejects me, at least I can learn from an experience. And you can say the same thing for maybe cold approaching as well. A lot of men are afraid to cold approach because they're afraid of being rejected. Let that rejection fuel you and make it so that you can realize what still needs to be improved on. Maybe you have to work more on your physique. Maybe you have to work more on your flirting skills or your overall social skills. It's better than to fail than to be a coward. And remember, even if you do fail, there's always a story to tell. So I have a pretty long actionable step here, and it's to journal about your latest failure. It can be your latest failure or even your biggest failure, your most memorable failure. For example, what I journaled about was my latest physics test, which didn't go as well as I hoped for it to go. And it's my first low mark in a long time. So, what you have to do when analyzing this failure is to start off by being generous and by writing all the things that went well. And when you're writing everything that went well, you have to literally find every single detail which is positive. For example, I don't know, you remembered the formulas to your maths tests. You were pretty quick. You could even write down that you were already prepared with your pencil, rubber, and pen as soon as the teacher got in. That your pencil was sharpened properly, that you had a ruler with you. Go into minute detail to describe everything that went well. After that, describe the thought process you had while preparing for the failure and while exhibiting the failure. Analyze the effects that failure had on your life. Did it disappoint the people around you? Do you feel less of a man or less loved? Less confident? Finally, go from being extremely generous, like at the start, to being extremely strict with yourself and write every single thing that went wrong. Finally, having considered all of that, reattempt it. It may be something from long ago which you can't redo. Find a way to make amends, even if it's the smallest thing. Maybe you had a go-kart race when you were 8 years old and you arrived last. Invite those friends you had when you were 8 and redo it. Find a way to redo it. That's it for the guide. I hope it was of use to you. Now, considering that a lot of people come here from the communities that I'm in, for example, Adonis gang, tribe leaders, it's very likely that you've already seen this guide because I wrote it down in the communities and posted it online. And I was originally gonna post it directly to YouTube and maybe in the communities put a more summarized version of it, so that it could have possibly led people to going on to the YouTube channel to see it. But I decided to put the whole thing in the community. So I'll definitely put a link to it down here so you can see it both in Adonis Gang and in Tribal Leaders. And make sure you subscribe to both communities, they're both completely free. And you get to learn from people who definitely have more experience in comparison to me. That being said, keep a strong mind and stay like a lion.